Hello, everyone. Welcome. And thank you so much for being here today. I hope you are all doing well. This is the benefits of bilingualism, how multilingualism sets up students for life. My name is Catherine Rickman. I'm the editor of Frenchly. Frenchly is the leading publication for the Francophile community in the United States, United Kingdom, and around the world. I would encourage you, if you do not already, to follow our newsletter. You can email us at info@frenchly.us. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Frenchly Does It, or on Facebook and YouTube. Those of us joining now will notice that your cameras and webcams are off to allow us to focus on the speakers. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our guests. First, we have Mireille Rabatte, who is the head of school at the Lycée International Winston Churchill in London. Would you like to say hi to us, Mireille?
Of course. Hello, Catherine. Hello, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here today with you, here from London. And we are looking forward to that webinar. And so welcome to all your guests. We are a bilingual international school in London, in the UK. And we run bilingual programs from age 3 to age 18 in French and in English.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Also from the Lycée International Winston Churchill, we have Micah Kandor, who is the IB coordinator and the history teacher at Lycée. Micah, welcome.
Hello, good morning. Lovely to be here. I'm just wondering how things are over there in New York. As Mireille said, I work at the Lycée International de Londres Winston Churchill. I'm originally from the Netherlands, finding myself at a French international school living in London. So when it comes to bilingualism, I have some stories to add.
A little more than bilingual. Well, welcome, Micah. And last but certainly not least, we have Tom Four, who is the Dean of Students at the French American School of New York. Hi, Tom. How are you doing today?
Hi, good afternoon, good morning. Great to be here with the Winston Churchill School as well. We have very similar programs, IB, French Baccalaureate, age 3 all the way to 18 as well, and similar histories. So it's great to be here. We'll compare notes, and great to speak with you, Catherine, and with all your guests today. So just like Micah, I've had the luxury, the privilege of multilingualism, and I've been lucky enough to be born in France to French-American parents, and then move to Japan, and then to England as well, and then to New York finally. So it is truly a privilege, and we'll get into the weeds. We'll discuss all the benefits as we go. But I'm Exhibit A for the multilingual experience. So it's great to be here and share with you, and thanks for the honor.
Fantastic. So as you can see today, we have living proof of just how far a bilingual education can take you. We are going to have a discussion for about 45 minutes. And after that, we are going to take questions from the audience. I have a few questions that were emailed into us. You can also ask us in the Q&A box below on your Zoom screen. And you can also, we will also be taking live questions. So once we get to that portion, you can just raise your hand and we will come and have someone unmute you and you can take your stab. So first off, I guess I would like to ask the big one, the reason we're here, which is, what do you consider to be the greatest benefits of a bilingual education? Mireille, I was wondering if you would like to start us off.
Well, of course, there are many reasons why parents should choose a bilingual education for their children as soon as and as early as possible. However, the biggest one, in my view, is that it equips young minds for the future, and for a future that is mostly unknown. We don't, but we know that it's going to be a global world, and we know that our children are going to be moving around the planet, whether on Zoom, like we did over the past 3 months, or physically, but they will be interacting with people from all over the world. And bilingualism specifically trains young minds to understand others, to listen and to empathize with people who are coming from a different culture, because it is one of the way that it develops this the brain, and the fact that they have to use two sets of references for pretty much everything they do. So I would, in my view, that's the biggest asset, equipping students for a very global interactive life.
Perfect. Um, Tom, would you like to weigh in on that for us?
Just to piggyback off what Mireille was saying, I think we actually, when we spoke before this, we used the same language, which is interesting because we're in two different countries, different systems, yet we both like to say that our schools are not just language schools. We're bilingual, we're multilingual, but we're really about raising young people. We're raising the next generation, trying to prepare them for a more and more interconnected world. And we're doing so with the multiple languages advantage. But we're not just a language school. And so what we mean by that is we're benefiting from the empathy and social emotional intelligence and diversity of experiences that a bilingual or multilingual education exposes students to. So I think we're really saying the same thing in different ways, which is that it's about the human experience and on a cognitive level, and we can get into the neurology of it, but or the neuroscience of it, but even just at a cognitive level, the students are developing those skills to be better global citizens.
Excellent. And how do you think that the schools that you work at differ from, well, I mean, you mentioned language schools, but also, for example, the lycée in the United States, which are run more directly through the French government, and what this kind of an education looks like compared to something that has perhaps an international but still a monolingual education?
I guess I'll take that first since you mentioned the U.S. I think our peer schools in the U.S. Benefit from similar experiences as ourselves. As much as we always have really tried to put at the forefront that we are French American, and there are reasons why we do so. It's that the students are truly following a bi-curricular program. So sometimes just quantitatively, that means they're developing a certain work ethic to be able to handle a large quantity of work without getting into the qualitative benefits. So they have a work ethic that serves them well throughout life. But I wouldn't want to besmirch our peer schools in the U.S. because they still benefit from, first of all, enhanced language acquisition being in the U.S. and of course the experience of immersion. So as long as and this is down to the families and the communities if they take advantage of this or not, but if they are seeking the fully immersive experience, they can certainly benefit from that. Certainly, we see that in certain lycées that don't have the IB or other kind of curricular approaches to international mindedness, perhaps they're following a slightly more classically French curriculum. I think the best way of looking at it from our point of view is that at FASNY, we're trying to bridge as much as possible and marry together the best of both approaches, the best of both worlds, to coin a phrase that I'm not coining myself, to use a phrase. We're trying to, as much as possible, mix the students whenever curricularly and schedule-wise we can manage to do that, so that we can see how the sort of, without getting into stereotypes, the slightly more American approach or international approach and the slightly more French approach can in fact complement each other rather than clash.
Perfect. And so speaking of mixing, I was wondering if someone wanted to talk about perhaps the the more social benefits of bilingual education. For example, you're taking people from different cultures and you're putting them in the same place, regardless of where they come from, and you're combining these different educational approaches. Mireille, would you like to?
Yeah, I think that cultural awareness is actually what makes a difference, and diversity is what makes a difference between just an international school anywhere in the world that's monolingual, as you said, um, and a bilingual school where usually you find a lot more diversity of backgrounds, experiences in the families, experience in the staff and the teachers' lives. In our school, our teachers have lived in altogether. We have 90 teachers for a staff of about 120 and 900 students. And our 90 teachers accumulates life experience in 44 different countries, which means that Micah and I, for instance, have lived in the US, but that's just one country. So 44 different countries. And I believe that that diversity that is brought by the staff as well as by the families creates a melting pot that's very much a microcosm, and that necessarily leads to a cultural awareness. Our children have to interact with teachers and other children who have all kinds of different references in their heads. And so and using two languages to communicate that, I believe helps. It's a little bit like triangulation, when you want to find your place in the world, you need 3 points. If you have two languages plus one school, those are your 3 points, and you can know where you see it from there. So that's what I would say, Micah.
Yes, Micah?
Yes, sorry. What I wanted to add as well is that, the IB that both of our schools offer, was founded as well with the intent to create a more peaceful world. And I think we do see that in our classrooms as well, where we do have students from different countries and sometimes even countries that are at war. But being able to speak the same language, whether that is English in our case or French, does help with, understanding each other and understanding the backgrounds of our cultures, etc. So I think that is quite important.
And do you think that sharing that sort of experience, sharing multiple languages and a more specific curriculum, do you think that that creates a more tighter knit community at a school like this than, for example, your average public school in the United States or the United Kingdom?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And that's not just the nature of the program and the curriculum, I must say, but international schools do become a community also because many of us do not have families living in the countries where we are. And so, the school has a completely different function than I would say for somebody, living in a country where their family is as well. But definitely the IB curriculum is also really focused not only on, that understanding, but also in showing different perspectives. And so discussing things from different perspectives does also help in creating that cultural awareness and international understanding.
Wonderful. I would like to put a quick reminder to our viewers. I noticed that we've been getting a couple of questions come in. Later on, we will be taking questions, and if you prefer, you can raise your hand and we will be able to answer you live. So just wanted to throw that out there. And then, let me see. So I'm interested in, you've talked a bit about the IB curriculum, and I wondered if you could speak a bit about sort of kind of how regulated that curriculum is, and how different, for example, you think that curriculums at two different schools are, despite the fact that you're using a similar sort of baseline. Micah, you wanted to?
So the IB, of course, is a framework, and I think both of us were offering the IB diploma program. So that is a pre-university curriculum. Just to talk about language learning within that program, it is very important where out of the 6 subjects that students have to choose, 2 of them are a language. One of them is the stronger language. It could be the mother tongue. The second one is an additional language or another mother tongue for our bilingual students. And then there is an opportunity to have a third language. So that is really also about, what languages can you study? But then the concept of language becomes very important within the whole of the curriculum as well. One of the things that the IB is always saying is that all teachers are language teachers. Language is, of course, our most important way of communicating to our students. And so even teaching history for myself, I am a language teacher. I need to not only teach the subject related vocabulary, but often I need to help students understand what we're talking about if it's not their native language, because they might have acquired certain words in a different language. And then within the curriculum as well, we talk about language as a way of knowing. It becomes about also, is math a language? What kind of language is math? What do we use the language of math in other subjects as well? How does it differ from a regular language like a Spanish, etc.? So language plays a vital role within the IB program, and that's just very, very interesting. You not only learn another language, but you learn about language as well. So that is really nice. The curriculum itself is regulated in that you have this framework, 2 languages, students do a math, they do a science, they do a humanities, and they can do an art as well. But within that framework, there is choice. And so students can, for example, choose the languages that they feel most comfortable in. And the IB also provides for mother tongue language studying, where they could do even a subject called mother tongue self-study, where maybe it's more difficult to find a teacher for, let's say, I'm just thinking of an interesting language, Thai. It might be difficult to find a Thai teacher in London, but there is provisions for these students also in London to learn Thai as a mother tongue language.
That's wonderful. Very interesting. I did want to just direct a quick question to Mireille, because I know that her time with us is a bit more limited. So I wanted to ask, a lot of people in the United States, obviously, grow up sort of studying languages in school, but most of that language curriculum doesn't kick in until a little bit later. And there are also, of course, lots of people right now saying, as an adult, I want to learn a new language. Could you speak a little bit about the benefits of sort of starting much earlier, and maybe at what kind of stages you really want to start learning languages if you want that to be a substantial part of your vocabulary?
The earliest is the better, honestly. And so when children are 2 or 3 entering a bilingual maternelle or preschool is certainly the best. In our school, for 3 and 4 years old, we have a setup of 2 teachers in the classroom. One is 2 qualified early years teachers, but one in the French curriculum and one in the British curriculum. So we have those 2 native speakers who are highly qualified teachers together in the classroom, which sort of reproduces or mimics a bilingual family. Because let's be honest, what we offer to our family is hopefully what they cannot offer, which is a high level of thinking and studying and discussing and writing in 2 different languages. And it's really, as Tom said earlier, and we really share that across our 2 schools at least, and we know each other pretty well, Fasni and us. It's the culture that comes with, or the cultures, should I say, that come with the languages. A language is nothing if not the vehicle for a culture. And so being brought up with 2 cultures, understanding that culture is something that is not unique. It's unique to you, but there are so many in the world. Understanding early that that culture is something a little bit wider oneself is, in my view, absolutely essential. And there are studies really um, exciting and mind-blowing properly studies that show that when languages are started before the age of 10 and as early as possible, then two different areas of the brain light up in a way. You know, they've done all kinds of brain imagery about that for maybe 20 years now. And so when you look at those images, it's really interesting how by people who started or have received a bilingual education from an early age have two different areas, each of them for each language. And if you have three, then that's three areas. Whereas people who start learning a language later in life would actually use this partly the same area, which means that the second language is actually piggybacking on the first one. And so you develop more, a wider area of your brain, quite literally, but also you develop different ways of making those connections within the brain. And I believe that's also beneficial in terms of having deep discussions, because you think better, you just think better. You know, more studies show that students in bilingual school just score higher in pretty much every in every assessment, whether it's math, as Micah said, or history, or science, anything. They just have more at their disposal. They have more. If thinking is like cooking, you just have more ingredients, and that you can pick from and choose to create your own recipe. So
Interesting. I love that metaphor. And so not all parents who are introducing their children into bilingual education necessarily speak the language that their children will be learning. Obviously, a lot of parents, I'm sure, are interested in this because they want to give their children tools that they themselves do not have. How do you think that parents can support their children in bilingual education when they do not speak the language? Tom?
I'll jump in, and then of course Micah and Mireille can piggyback off. And again, Mireille's time with us is a little shorter, so so I'll definitely cede the mic. I think the key word you used is support. So the advantage of schools like ours is that they get to benefit from a slightly smaller size. You mentioned already, Mireille, your staffing. Ours is quite similar. We have a lot of manpower available, or woman power available, to work with the families directly. So communication is key. Thanks to education technology today, it's easier than ever for parents to stay implicated, especially for the younger ones, with the almost day-to-day even experience that their children are having. So the advantage of a multilingual school is also that while we may not have every language available in the school, we are dealing with 40, 50 nationalities, and it's easier in a small setting to connect the different pieces together, and parents help each other out. Our PTA organization, our parent representatives are essential to the operation of our school, as much within our walls as outside our walls. As Micah mentioned, we're fundamentally a small community. We don't want to be insular, but of course we want to be supportive and united with each other within our community. And then of course we can be central to that community effort to engage with the larger communities outside of it. So I think you're talking about support, and it can be technological, it can be specifically content-based, and so that's where having a strong, dedicated staff who are focused on the learning experience of each student. That's vital. So it's important to have a strong staff. And luckily, when you're an international school, you have a profile that teachers want to be a part of. And so we have the great luxury or benefit of receiving great candidates to teach in our schools. And so the key is support and community. And as you mentioned, we see the differences in language or differences in culture that we're going to experience every day as a benefit, as a added value, right? So if there are sometimes issues that come with that, with difference, just as in all matters of identity and in the world, differences can be a challenge, but if we work together and support each other, we end up benefiting from them.
Excellent. We're going to go to Micah in just a second, but I did just want to say, those of you who are sending in questions, please keep them coming. We will get to them once we've reached the question and answer portion of the event, but we are still getting those. And Micah, you wanted to continue?
I just wanted to add that as a community as well, especially our school, we provide support for the parents as well, where the parents could embark on learning a language themselves in either English or French. And so the school offers courses for the parents, not only for the parents, but for the teachers as well. So I am currently still taking French, and I take great delight in trying to have a parent-teacher conference in French instead of in English, just to accommodate the parents, but also to practice my own language skills.
Oh, well, that's got to be a double seller. Mireille, yes.
Well, I do believe, like Tom said, that there is a huge advantage for the parents and the rest of the family in bringing their children to a bilingual, multilingual school. I can see precisely because in London we are a little closer maybe to Europe and to France. Not maybe, obviously. Parents are surprised, particularly French parents who come to our school are surprised by the international feel that two languages spoken freely and quite, seamlessly across the school make them feel. And so Micah said that the school an international school has a different function, and than a monolingual school in its own country. And that's because the school becomes central to a family's social life. And so parents are exposed to the same kind of level of diversity that they might not have in their own country. Not because that own country doesn't have multicultural fabric. It does, but that people just don't get to know each other. Whereas in a school, you do interact with the rest of the families, and most, having young children, most of your new friends are going to be the parents of those children. So I think it's really, to us too, it is really important that the parents participate in the life of the school. And Tom said that it is vital to the operations of the school, of course. And for us, the Parents Association is a tremendous asset to the school and to bring the parents and the community together. I think that helped tremendously. We're a fairly young school. We're only 5 years old. However, we already have 900 students, and we're a community of about 5,000 people. And what we do impacts the life of 5,000 people. So I do, in response to your initial question, Catherine, about how can parents support when they don't speak the language and all that, how can they support their children? The best way to support the school is come and participate in the life of the school and have that experience of multiculturalism and interaction with different cultures. And then that's something that everybody brings home and can discuss and, reminisce.
Oh, well, that's truly wonderful. I mean, sort of building out from there, it's like you said, it's not just about one child learning a new language. That affects everyone who comes into contact with that person. And I wanted to discuss, so since we have one school in the United States and one school in the United Kingdom, I thought it'd be interesting to get into the differences that you see there in terms of, I mean, for example, the United States has a bilingual rate of less than 20%, which I'm sure is considerably less than in a lot of areas of Europe. And I wanted to know sort of what you saw with that and how that affects your approach to teaching. Micah?
So obviously the United Kingdom here is an interesting case where language learning is as they call it, even in a crisis, where there's very few students who are taking up a second language, and where it's no longer mandatory to take a language, for example, in the GCSEs or the A levels. And it's a crisis because, of course, with Brexit going on, this becomes more and more important to be able to make links with other cultures and to be able to speak other languages, whether it's for trade or diplomacy. So I think our school has a role there where we do reach out to our local community as well, in showing that we are a school that offers that opportunity of language learning.
Wonderful. Tom?
So the US, and this is going to touch on some of our earlier points, but the US is an interesting experience for any educator, because each state has a lot of control over the contents of their curriculum. So I won't go, it's a much discussed topic, but I think it just reminds us all the more of what's interesting about either a French program or the IB, is that they both represent a certain connection to the world beyond, and they take you out of that state-by-state context. Both in the end are fully encouraging of multilingualism, because 2 to 3 languages are at the core of their education experience. I think especially in the context of our current political moments, it's important to remember just how much schools and societies reflect each other. And so in his seminal book, Between the World and Me, Ta-Nehisi Coates, young American author, wrote, "Why was I worried about learning French in 7th grade when I was really worried about the gang wars that were taking place outside school?" So schools, of course, have to contend with their complex symbiotic relationship with societies. Our programs hopefully have the benefit of rubbing off and having secondary external benefits. It's not surprising, though, to see that the IB in the US is growing at a tremendous rate. There's clearly appeal to it for many families if they can access it. So part of your question is really a question not about schools, but about societies. But it's important for us as schools to see the relationship between society and schools. And all I can say really is that based on all the benefits we mentioned regarding multilingualism, hopefully, if nothing else, the benefits that are seen from IB programs, from international programs, the new theory of knowledge syllabus, for example, that's just coming out for next year, puts a new focus on international mindedness, and specifically on their core theme is called knowledge and the knower. So specifically focusing on the individual themselves. Hopefully, all these kinds of actions and multilingualistic trends have benefits because they will inspire others. Hopefully those who are in charge of state syllabi will see the benefits and try to reinvigorate, not trying to teach somebody French in 7th grade without them understanding why, but rather helping them understand why having extra linguistic skills and exposure can only benefit them. So hopefully we will have that effect.
And I think that why is a very interesting question, especially within the United States, because obviously you are operating in New York, which is far more international than many parts of the country. What would you say to someone, say, living in a rural area in the United States who might think, well, I've never been abroad, my parents have never been abroad, there's no one in my community who speaks other languages. What use do I have for a foreign language as a practical thing that I need in my day-to-day?
It's a complex question, but in a nutshell, I would say two things. One, the U.S. is incredibly diverse, much more so than just kind of in that urban versus rural binary. Especially with it's when the borders and access to the country are open. It's a country built on immigration. So to a certain extent, it's in our history to seek this. So much of the effort is going to be again, going back to those who command the syllabi, those who are overseeing public school actions. There's a certain amount of embracing and then exploiting what is essentially a key American trait. Another thing to add is that there are in fact international schools all over the country. In the state of Maine, which I happen to have a relationship with, my parents retired there. In the state of Maine, there are French schools, there are IB schools. My uncle was teaching in a school that had become accessible to Chinese international students who would dorm there. And that's in the state of Maine, which is seen as perhaps not the same kind of cosmopolitan center as New York. So if Maine can do it, so can Idaho or Nebraska, and they are in fact doing it. The issue is for it to spread and connect and engage. And so that's why I think we talk about communities trying to not remain insulated and making sure that we work as much as possible to get those communities to spread both kind of, it's nice to have more students to spread in that sense, but also just to engage because we learn more from it. And that's what the country is all about.
Wonderful. If Maine can do it, anyone can.
I can say that since my folks are up here.
You're like, I'm allowed. Great. So we've spoken quite a bit about what it is actually like within those years that you are in attendance at a bilingual school. Could any of you speak to sort of the long-term benefits? You know, where do a lot of these students end up? What are the benefits leading into adult life and maybe the professional benefits of this kind of education? Right?
Yeah, I can do it. Micah can do it even better because she is the super multilingual person in the room. Well, I've been in international education for a lot more years than I admit. I started my career as a young teacher at Brandeis University in Massachusetts, just outside Boston. I guess a lot of people know Brandeis. And so it's been, for those many years, I've seen students moving to universities everywhere in the world. So I worked as deputy head at Lycée Rochambeau in Washington, D.C. for 5 years. There, I worked at the French school in Oslo, in Norway. I worked in San Francisco, where I met Micah, at French American International School and International High School. And our students went everywhere in the world. And here, our students go to the Netherlands, they go to China to study, then we have quite a few students moving to Hong Kong, and they're not particularly Chinese to begin with. We have students going to Italy, lots of students going to Canada, very popular, Canada, of course, everywhere in the biggest and most desirable universities in the UK. We have plenty of students at Imperial College in Cambridge, in Bath. This year is Bath, I don't know why. LSE, the London School of Economics. So our schools really open a cornucopia of choices for our students. They can decide to study for higher education in either of those two languages, because again, this is not about language, it's about thinking, it's about being able to express oneself and to write at a university level in any of the two languages, and sometimes three, really. So I think that the advantage for it opens choices that might not be so readily available to other students.
Micah, did you want to add on that?
Yes, I think also because, you know, the approach of our schools in this bilingual setting, it makes it less nerve-wracking for students to do these kind of things. So yes, of course, it's exciting to go to another country, but they're so resilient and creative in a way that it's, you know, not a huge step for them to maybe move to another country because they've done that already, or they know somebody from that country, and so it becomes an easier thing to do, I think.
Wonderful. Tom, did you have anything you wanted to add on to that?
I'll just piggyback again. As Micah just alluded, I was going to add to what Mary said. This not only this amazing access, but indeed, as it goes without saying, but Micah added, they also succeed in these environments, which is so exciting to see. You have students who come back to the school, and I'm sure it's the same in London, because these are hubs. So we see the students come back, and one day you'll have the same experience we have, which is of having students then bring their children to our school. But so you're really looking at a world network. It's a huge privilege, as I mentioned before. So it's important for our students to understand that as well. But not just success in college, but then beyond college, that network that is connected. So in a very concrete way, a lot of what we're talking about is a little bit more abstract, but obviously in a very concrete, you know, from an economic and political point of view, the networks, an international school, be it IB networks, be it French-backed networks, or in schools like ours, what's fantastic is that those two are becoming, you know, a communal series of communities. Is fantastic for the students who, especially now, thanks to technology, they can even keep in touch with friends in ways that we couldn't in the past. They can keep in touch with their friend from the Lycée Winston Churchill when they come to FASNY, or vice versa, or maybe they move then to Hong Kong, where we have other colleagues who we've worked with, and then so we can say, look for this teacher because she used to teach at FASNY, and she's going to take good care of you, and then that there's a constant compounding effect in which ultimately we are exponentially growing our communities and our networks, and both cognitively again, and also just in terms of lifestyle and success potential. It's really, really beneficial.
Wonderful. So in a few minutes, we are going to have our Q&A session. So please keep sending your questions in. But I did want to touch on, before we get to that, obviously we are in some very confusing times right now with COVID-19, and I wondered if you could touch a little bit on how you are handling this crisis, and perhaps even what the benefits of a bilingual education look like in the time of coronavirus. Micah?
Yeah, so our school, being an iPad school as well, has just ran as normal. And so I've been teaching my normal timetable. I've been able to communicate with my students through Zoom, as we're doing now. You know, in some ways, it's of course a different kind of teaching, but Zoom also has the chat function. Students can communicate via email, via chat. Should they have any questions, or if they want to make any comments, be it about language or not, or about the curriculum. So of course, you know, face-to-face is different, but we've been able to continue education as normal.
Right. Marie?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a really interesting experience for us, being the sort of new kid on the block in London, and having made the choice from the beginning to use modern tools for the modern age. It's not about the tools, but it is for what it allows us to do, of course. And so we had to explain over the past 5 years, we've had a lot of questions about that. And suddenly COVID-19 arrives and we switched. It was really like a light switch. Monday night, kids went home. We closed down the school, and on Tuesday morning at 8:30, everybody knew exactly what to do. Everybody was in front of their iPad and computers, and life continued as normal. So we literally switched from the physical environment to the virtual environment. And I do believe that in the upcoming century, we're entering, COVID-19 makes us enter the 21st century, really. That's what the 21st century is probably going to look like. And so being able, having the confidence to having, the ability with the tools. After that, you can do all the great things because school is not about the tools. It's about the pedagogy and the relationship between the children and the teachers. But I believe that we were so successful over about 3 months, and our kids they've continued to progress in wonderful ways. I mean, there are testimonials on our website. So our website has a lot of information about what we're talking about today, bilingualism, the research behind it and all that. So I would strongly suggest people visit our website. I'm sure FASNI has the same. But what I wanted to say that the success of those past 3 months lies not in the use of technology, but rather in the fact that technology allows us to continue our community's life and the community that we had built previously in the physical world could continue because there was this, trust between the school and the families, between the teachers and the students. I would jump in and see what was going on in the virtual classroom, and it was amazing. We do, well, now that the school is off for the summer, of course, but we used to do online classroom visit, and parents were quite amazed. You can see the relationship continuing. And so when, of course, for children, the world is different. It's not as physical as it used to be in the 20th century. That's it.
Tom, would you like to give us a quick answer and then we'll go to questions?
Sure, just for the New York side, because we're on different timelines, but it's just interesting because we had the same experience of going du jour au lendemain from one day to the next. We had the benefit of the weekend though, so we went from Friday to Monday. Friday we closed, Monday we were online, and we kept the same timetables. The students finished the programs, so we were very pleased with that. And as Mireille and Micah alluded to, it's a testament to the technology, of course, but especially to that, I'm going to use a French word because we love the franglais, the niaque, the ability of our teachers and students, and then the parents who were supporting them, the families supporting them, because they were integral as well to the experience. But that ability of theirs to engage and adapt so quickly was really exhibit A to what everything is that we're talking about today.
Right. Well, I have asked all of my questions, and now it is your turn. We have a few questions you can either submit through the Q&A box in the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can also raise your hand and we can go to you live. So ask away. I think I will. Okay, we've got a live question from Rocio.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi. So my name is, it's pronounced Rocio, and I'm based in Paris right now. I have Dominican parents, so I grew up with Spanish and English. I grew up in New York City, but I also learned French starting 5 years ago, and now I'm in Paris, so I'm really kind of advancing and close to kind of a fluent level, almost there. And I actually just started to teach myself Italian. So I'm here because I'm kind of a self-taught at this point, besides the native part. So thank you. So my question was really about like the career path. I'm very much interested in, learning how to learn as a child, and maybe for the future that's good information to know. But right now I'm here because of my own kind of endeavors of teaching myself. So my question is, what kind of career paths do you see for a polyglot, somebody who speaks several languages? Thank you.
Do we have Micah? Do you want to answer?
I would say the world is your oyster. I think when in my days, maybe language learning was considered, in relation to tourism. But now it is needed in trade, it is needed in education, it is needed in a globalizing, world of diplomacy, etc. The world is your oyster. You can do anything you want.
Thank you.
Yeah, research as well, all kinds of science fields. And I don't think it's not about language or SEO. It's about developing bilingualism for us in our schools is about developing the brain in a better, more efficient way to make better thinkers. So, I would say a polyglot has, you know, any pathway you choose. It's rather giving you more choices than anything else.
So the just to answer your question from a slightly different angle, Rocio, and thanks for your question. I've been using myself as an example of the kind of lifelong bilingual student, but turning to my parents, my mom grew up in the United States in a monolingual family. My dad grew up in a monolingual French family in France. They met in grad school because they were able to develop their language skills. They were able to access universities. So Sorbonne for my mom, University of Champaign-Urbana in Illinois for my dad. And then they traveled the world together. So there's both professional opportunities, but also lifelong opportunities that open up thanks to this. And certainly you, in all matters of career, you need many things. You need qualifications, you need to study, you need good experience. You also need mentors. Again, communication, language is going to be key to establishing relationships with people that you'd like to work with, work for, have working for you. So as was said, you have the world as your oyster. You really have a passport to the world. Granted, there are many aspects to consider, but language is right up there at the top. So you're in good shape.
Thank you very much.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you, Rocio, for your question. I think we are going to move on. I have a question that was emailed to us earlier today from Natalia. She said, my question is, which languages are most beneficial to have in your business and personal repertoire for today's and future climates? Micah?
Obviously, English is a global language, but if we look at the future, a lot of what comes back is that also Chinese or Mandarin, of course, and Arabic are going to be languages that will be beneficial to learn. And of course, perhaps more difficult to learn for us, but I think a lot of the schools nowadays, and certainly ours, we offer Mandarin as part of our curriculum as well. And so more and more schools are developing a curriculum for that.
And just to add another science piece of trivia, one of the things that we often cite is that multilingual students, even into adulthood, as Mireille said, if you're lucky enough to be able to instill that multilingualism early on, it's not going to disappear as you get older. But even as an adult, it is easier then to acquire additional languages on top of that. So I was always jealous because my friend was able to speak 5 languages when she was 16, but she only spoke 2 at home. Those 3 others she just acquired because she was so multilingual. So there's definitely a lot of cognitive benefits. Yeah.
Can I just add as well? you know, having grown up in the Netherlands, English is mandatory for us. And so in my almost limited worldview, I was very much focused on, okay, English, you know, and international schools that I went to were English speaking. And when I moved to this school, I had to actually adapt this view, thinking, well, why would English be the world language, and why not French? You know, why do international students only have to speak English? And I thought that was really interesting as well, to see internationalism not as, oh, we all can speak English and therefore we can communicate, but there are you know, there's so many other languages to tap into, and again, it's changed my view and my world as well, having access to that, you know, to that other language, and seeing that students, you know, can have very international backgrounds yet are francophone. So that's an interesting thing as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be English in any case.
Okay, keep raising your hands if you have any questions. It looks like we have some from the comments section. I think I'm going to take one from Dominique. Let's see. So she asks, for early education, do you teach each language in a very structured way with grammar, sentence development, vocabulary development, and etymology in order to enable both strong competency in the language as well as natural growth and language development for young children? Mireille?
No, the answer is no, because that's not the way to learn a language, precisely when you're young. So we move toward that when the students become familiar. You have to know the language to understand and start being the grammarian. And you know, I used to be a teacher of the classics, so Latin and Greek and German and all the things. I'm a grammarian at heart. But that's not the way you teach for the younger years, and that was Dominique's question, younger years. That's why we have two teachers in the same room at the same time. It's because you need to get into what is natural and a native speaker is not someone who can explain the grammar, which most of the time has been created a posteriori, as we know. It's someone who knows. And you know, when you ask someone, why do you say that like this in French? And a French person or a native speaker of any language would say, well, that's the way we do it, you know, that's the way we do it. So you want to, a native speaker is someone who has, who gets infused, I would say, in the language and the culture of that language so much that he or she cannot say why. That's why. But however, when you move, you know, in the older years, when you move to secondary school, of course, that becomes something very structured, and yes, grammar, and which is very French, huh? Because the British don't teach that at all, and neither do the American school, I believe. But yes, being able to write in an elegant, sophisticated way to show the elegant and sophisticated way of thinking, yeah, that requires a mastery, but that's not for early years.
Okay. Yes, Micah?
I just wanted to support that, and to say, you know, I've had French for 7 years in the Netherlands, but I've never made so much progress as in the last 3 years of immersing myself in the school and listening to conversations, trying out my French instead of, you know, translating little sentences. I feel that, you know, my French has just improved so much by listening. And so I totally agree with Mireille Rabaté.
Okay. Tom, did you want to comment? I did want to move on to our next question since we do not have too much time.
Let's go to the next one. Yeah, keep going.
Okay. So Majid asks, how do schools, these bilingual schools, contribute to togetherness, unity, and le vivre ensemble in multicultural societies? So we touched on this a little bit, but.
Maybe I'll go first then. So the communal aspect, the aspect in a way, we've talked a lot about what happens between our walls or inside, but also we've talked a lot about what happens once the people are outside our walls, either within the community or after they leave for colleges around the world, and then continue in those networks. I think we can always ask ourselves in any school, be they international or not, what is the role of our school within our community? So if I'm looking at your question, I see a number of different elements in it, but vivre ensemble and unity and togetherness, they speak to your social, your moral, your cultural, both norms and experiences. And I think the role of multiculturalism and schools especially is that schools can teach a curriculum that inspires students to act on it. And we can, as I mentioned, with parents, we work carefully with parents, with the staff, and then with the students to both teach in languages, but also teach international mindedness. And that is both a aspect of curriculum and a way of life, an approach, opening to different perspectives. I'm not saying that you need to have multiple languages to be empathetic, but empathy is closely linked to this multilingual ability. So the role of our specific kinds of schools are both internal, concretely pedagogical, and then just social. We have this communal role as hubs for expats, for diplomats, for travelers of the world. So we have that hub role. But yeah, it is also kind of internal to the community. Schools that are not multilingual would perhaps have a slightly different answer, but we'll keep it as short as possible there.
Okay. Yes, Micah, did you want to talk on?
So I can see also the question underneath there from Aude Le Barazer, who makes a valid comment saying, well, how do you continue to, to keep these links between children when they move around the world? And I think it says some values might be very different. I think
these are all great questions, by the way.
Yes, the schools that we are part of, whether it be international schools teaching the IB, and of course we are in an even more unique situation where we have two curriculums. They have a common philosophy, and there's, for example, an IB learner profile. I believe all the French AEV, they have a common philosophy, etc. And these are very closely related and linked. And so wherever students move to, they will find those same values and expectations.
Yes, Mary.
Your words, it might be the last, but I believe that an international, multicultural, bilingual school is very accepting because of its fabric. And we can start very difficult conversations that other schools may find themselves awkwardly stuck with. We don't feel that any subject is awkward, and we are quite open about diversity. Diversity is one of our goals and values at the same time. So, and I believe that particularly once you recognize that people speak different languages, therefore think differently about the world, it's not about creating a unified thing. It's really about bringing out what is so unique in everyone. And one of the things that Micah and I, and I'm sure Tom too, loves about the IB and international schools is that it's not propaganda. It's more a perspective and a way to offer different lenses to our students and look at the world from a different perspective. I would like to thank one of the participants who writes that her daughter was in an international school in Washington, D.C., and the fact that she had multicultural friends gave her a different perspective from what she only sees in the news. And I think that's what we have. We can, we welcome difficult discussions, which are absolutely necessary.
Right. We're going to get through one or two more questions.
I'm gonna go if you don't mind.
Oh, yes, of course. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Visit our website. You'll find lots and lots of resources. Thank you so much, Catherine and Romain, for having us today. Thanks, Tom and Micah. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye. Okay, so we are going to go next to an emailed question that we had from David. He starts, I need much more rigorous command of Italian than what I call restaurant Italian, which I already have. I will need to lecture to undergraduates and graduate students on content and methodology and to answer their questions precisely. I suspect, however, that I must master a level of everyday conversational Italian first, be comfortable with the language in some variety of settings. But what follow-on pedagogical method is most likely to give me reasonable command of the subtle differences in case and voice in oral use that will be necessary to lecture clearly and effectively? What sort of institutions can provide that rigor and intense training? Universities only, or would national language academies fit that bill? Yes, Micah?
From my personal perspective, I would say go there and immerse yourself. If I'm thinking, I'm a second language learner. Obviously, I've not grown up bilingually. Both of my parents are Dutch, and where I've learned the most is again in interaction, going to the country, living with families that speak the language, etc. And that has benefited me the most.
Piggybacking off Micah, I think it depends on your timeline, of course, but if you can have that immersion experience, that's ideal. That's going to be true whether you are monolingual or you speak 4 languages and are learning your 5th. Immersion is both going to aid you in terms of conversational, but also cultural understanding of the language. It's one thing to know a word's meaning. It's another to understand its connotative. The polysemy of connotation only comes from cultural context, and so that can take a life to learn, but to have the amount of conversational nuance that you're looking for your profession, even a couple weeks in a different place can already begin to soak in their language and their linguistic norms. There are excellent websites available now that definitely take you beyond a purely textbook approach. So I would take advantage of education technology if you have that available. But when you're thinking technology, perhaps if you can't have the full immersion experience, you can even use something like a Zoom as a means to even just have communication with a local. So ask your school for volunteers to have a conversation with you. Even just conversational immersion is so beneficial. Not to knock on the textbook approach, it certainly is very useful, especially in complementing other approaches. But there's something to be said for watching Netflix in that language, having a Zoom chat with somebody. And again, as Mike said, in a perfect world, you get to immerse yourself directly in person. That's the best way to learn.
I wanted to issue a brief apology to Majid. I saw that you wanted to ask your question live, but needed your Zoom software updated. So I hope that we answered your question. And I wanted to move on next. It looks like we've got a few questions from Dominique. I think perhaps so. Dominique wanted to know about any key references on research with brain imagery demonstrating benefits of a multilingual education, as well as studies showing the higher academic results. I wonder if there's anything that you could cite off the top of your head.
I would say off the top of my head that I don't have the latest, as Mireille said, it's been for about 20 to 30 years now that we've seen a lot of research on this. And so the references that I've used, being that I'm mostly a Dean of Students and English teacher, are the meta studies. So the studies of the studies, right? So I'd be happy to, I don't have them right in front of me, but I'm happy to share those afterwards. And we can, I'm sure, link to them or link to interesting people to further explore. But yes, there's been so much research done on this that just a couple of meta studies already show the not only social emotional benefits, but also we mentioned executive functions, spatial, visual skills, memory, very important. They're beginning to do research on multilingualism. I shouldn't say beginning because it's these things take years and years. So, but you're beginning to hear about, put it that way. Some folks trying to study the benefits of multilingualism in understanding better its relationship with Alzheimer's and whether there's some kind of key role there. So memory is a key one, even creativity. So we've talked a lot about the meta language component, the ability to add languages to your toolkit, to recognize what is a language, recognize patterns, grammars, as cited before. But even, I mean, as we mentioned, our school, we've kept a measure of our test scores compared to the national averages, and we noticed that we're very pleased to have 100 points higher on the SAT in the English reading verbal part, but we also had 100 points more in the math part, even though when you think math, you don't necessarily think language right away. So all that in short to say that key references I'm happy to share with Catherine and Romain afterwards. I don't have them right in front of me, but that mostly what I rely on is the meta studies, looking at the history of the research that's been done. But we also have some experts who can provide specifics. And as Mireille said, our website contains a lot of information, both about the benefits of bilingualism and multilingualism, but also on our mission statement, our value system, and our mindset, which also touch on some of the other topics that were raised about how to be internationally minded, how to tackle social justice issues, especially those that were raised even more exacerbated with COVID-19. It's inherent to the mission statement, which is available on the website.
And we will link any additional info inside the Frenchly article, which will be featured in our next Frenchly newsletter. So please subscribe if you are interested, and we will make that information available. We'll have some good resources for you. We are just about out of time. I did want to fit in one last question, if we can get a quick answer. So this is an anonymous question. IB school programs help students take college level courses in high school, which helps them make a smooth transition into higher education. But this is not the reason why IB schools are very popular all across. What are the driving forces behind their successes?
I'm just going to go ahead. I think part of what is the success is the increasingly globalizing world. And the fact that these IB schools are giving the students an opportunity to move from one country to another without losing time, without having to go into different systems. And so, you know, it's sort of a continuum for global families that are moving around. And secondly, I do think it's the philosophy of the IB, the focus not so much on, you know, the fact-based learning, but the most important thing for the IB is critical thinking. I mean, we touched upon, for example, grammar learning, even within the language learning in the IB. You know, grammar, yes, of course, but the more important aspect is critical thinking, creative thinking. And I think that adds also to the popularity of this curriculum, where, you know, it's not just memorizing data or facts.
Wonderful.
Can I add a point about that, Kat?
Yeah, please.
The encouraging thing too about other programs beyond the IB. Obviously, we're huge fans of the IB. We're in our 5th year now. We got we received our IB results yesterday, so it's still fresh in mind. We were very pleased with our results. Won't get into that now, but more info on our website. But we are also seeing in American education, but also French, to speak to our particular school. The French education system is also evolving, taking great leaps forward in taking this approach that we are a world that is super connected, that needs to not only inspire our students to branch out, but also make that world smaller at the same time and more accessible. And I've seen really impressive pedagogical improvements in terms of differentiation, in terms of embracing different approaches. We spoke of critical thinking, making sure to embrace different approaches to problem solving, thinking outside the box, and recognizing that different learners have different styles. And this is perhaps something that is only 10 to 20, maybe generously we'll say 30 years old in the French Ministre de l'Education's approach, but it's really come a long way. And so again, tapping into that idea that there are French schools and IB schools all around the world, it's really just such a pleasure to work in a school that offers these two programs, just like in London, because whichever program is the right fit for the student, they will be able to go down that track, exploit it for all it's worth, exploit in the French connotation of the term, which is to say benefit from it and draw on its strengths and make the most of themselves and self-actualize as international learners. So very proud to have both the French bac and the IB. The driving force behind them, their values, their curricular seriousness, the level of rigor that goes into both the analytical rigor, but also the intellectual rigor that comes with being open-minded and critical thinking. So it's true. It sounds flashy. It sounds, as Mirai said, it sounds like propaganda, but it's true that we have lived this experience, that our students benefit both in terms of concrete data points, in terms of content about the world, but also just in terms of their understanding of who they are in the world. So thank you for your questions. They've been great.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this discussion on the benefits of bilingualism and Frenchly's first webinar. Again, I'm Catherine Rickman. I would like to thank Tom at the French American School of New York, and Micah and Mireille, who joined us earlier at the Lycée International Winston Churchill. You can follow our newsletter for more information. We will be sending follow-up information. You can email us at info@frenchly.us and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Frenchly Does It, as well as YouTube and Facebook. And this will be live on Facebook and YouTube as well, so you can find it there. Yes, thank you everyone so much for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you, Catherine and Romain. Thank you, Frenchly and French Morning, and all of our audience today for your thoughtful questions. Thanks, Micah. Maybe our paths will cross one day. You never know in this multilingual world. Thanks very much, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Big thank you from London as well.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.